It is mental illness. The only reason people fight against it being mental illness is because they assume mental illness means bad, or it's something to be ashamed of. I wouldn't put down someone who has depression, or OCD, or schizophrenia, you know. All you can do is identify what the problem is, and then learn how to cope with it. People with gender dysphoria either learn how to live with it day to day and reaffirm their thoughts into reality, or they transition in order to alleviate the dysphoria if it's super bad. Destigmatizing mental illness is very important.
Agree. Some people still consider as such. But, the larger point, even if it is, what do we tend to do about mental illness? We treat it. We treat it with a treatment that ensures the most positive outcome. So you either have transition or conversion therapy. At least, in the cases that would warrant either approach. Conversion therapy is barbaric, though. I guess it all depends on whether or not you want the patient to have a positive outcome. Brings a whole new meaning to hormone therapy.
This thread went a lot better than it could have.
It actually is. I'm not too familiar with the subject. But thus far, it seems gender transitioning is the best known treatment if all other options have been exhausted. It seems to me that oftentimes even suggesting alternative options to gender transitioning is considered to be transphobic.
What the? The comments aren't locked?
It is.
I guess my question is, why do people think it isn't?
It is defined as a mental illness in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. I expect activists are trying to get this changed. Some people only like to follow the science when it aligns with their beliefs.
Greater than some people only like to follow the science when it aligns with their beliefs. IDK if I would tout the DSM as a static tome of science. Being gay was once considered a mental illness.
It still is in a lot of places.
I think gender dysphoria is considered a mental illness. The thing that isn't considered a mental illness is being trans. You can be trans without having dysphoria, in multiple ways. If someone is trans and has dysphoria, then transitions and no longer has any dysphoria, they're still trans. It's also possible to be trans and not have dysphoria without having ever taken any steps to transition. So the dysphoria is a mental illness, but not being trans itself.
Gender dysphoria is often thought of as a mental illness, however being transgender isn't. A lot of people think transgender equals gender dysphoria, hence the attitudes around calling it a mental illness, but those people don't realize you don't need dysphoria to be trans. Someone who is perfectly content with their body as it is still a valid transgender person.
Sorts by controversial.
I thought that the whole issue was that it was classified as a disorder, which sounds significantly more stigmatizing than a mental illness. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Man, I've been saying this for years and get hate every time I do. As someone with a list of mental illnesses, it's okay to admit that you have a mental illness, and body dysmorphia is definitely one of them. You are mixing terms. The problem is that dysphoria is equated for most uneducated people to being trans. Therefore, trans equals mentally ill. We heard it enough times that people do not understand. You cannot heal transness, but you can ease dysphoria, which is a common symptom in trans people.
Gender dysphoria is a mental illness, being transgender is not. Not all transgender people have gender dysphoria because gender dysphoria is not a requirement to be transgender. Cisgender people can also have gender dysphoria.
We used to and we don't now, so obviously over the decades of research by lots of different people it was found not to be. Being gay was also considered a mental illness, but gay people were found to be born that way, just like people with gender dysphoria.
Having a proportionate reaction to your life's circumstances is not usually mental illness, e.g. grief. However, trans people are vulnerable to having mental health issues, because of long-term distress.
Politics, only politics.
In the DSM-IV it was considered a condition related to schizophrenia IIRC. There are some very real similarities to schizotic conditions, because the real problem is with the brain's reality filter being unable to distinguish the real from the made-up. In this case, the person thinks her own image in the mirror is fake or wrong. Not sure about the DSM-IV. I'd heard it got removed for reasons, but I can't say for sure because I don't have access to a copy that I know if.
It is considered a mental illness. It is officially listed in the Diagnostics and Statistical Manual version 5, aka DSM-V aka the Psychologist's Bible.
I responded on another subreddit this. When I had a friend with anorexia, everyone supported her in her journey to get well. She saw fat where there was none. She had feelings of being fat despite being dangerously thin and malnourished. In other words, her perceptions were not real. We did not just agree with her because it was her truth. How is this different with gender confusion? I am respectfully asking, not judging.
It actually is considered a mental illness.
People have made gender a binary issue, so it follows that if your brain and your sexual preference don't match your physical attributes, the pressure to make them match will be greater, hence gender dysphoria. They don't always match in nature, and we have outlawed euthanizing infants and children to weed out the naturally gender dysphoric, so it's simply a thing that will always be there. Solution? Stop caring about who likes whom, and stay out of people's sex lives. Problem solved. Now can we just enjoy the gay penguins for once? P.S. Being differently configured isn't a mental illness. The mental illness is what we create when we pretend things fit into a neat little box.
You are mixing up gender and sexual orientation.
Gender dysphoria is a mental illness. It's like depression or anxiety, etc. Many folks treat gender dysphoria by socially or medically transitioning, and often some level of mental health therapy is absolutely recommended, too. Being transgender is not a mental illness, and you also don't need to experience gender dysphoria to be trans. Many trans folk realize they're trans because of the opposite feeling, gender euphoria. You're transphobic.
It is, but the woke don't like it.